Hey everyone, my name is Ashley, and for me personally, I've always loved to read. When I'm stressed out or I just want to go somewhere else for a little while, reading is a way for me to escape reality. I believe that is what is meant by the following quote from Philip Pullman. After nourishment, shelter, and companionship, stories are the things that we need most in the world. To me, stories are just as fun as watching a movie or playing a board game. You can put yourself in the place of one of the characters and actually be someone else for a little while. You can be a brave dragon slayer, or you can just be a strong, independent woman. Basically, with stories, you can be anything. I can see the truth in this quote in many of the stories that I have read throughout the semester. I have seen a story be a way to overcome a fear, to tell the truth, or to just keep a memory alive. In The Yellow Wallpaper by Charlotte Perkins Gilman, which, by the way, was one of my favorite stories from the semester, you can see that the narrator overcomes oppression from her husband, among other fears. The story was written in a time when women were supposed to be submissive to their husbands. They were supposed to be your typical stay-at-home housewife, clean the house, watch the children, while the dad goes out and works and does all the fun stuff. Well, she was very sick, and her husband pretty much forbade her to work or to write, when in all reality, writing was her release. So she began keeping a diary in secret where she wrote down all of her fears and worries because she had no one else to share them with. She couldn't share them with her family, she couldn't share them with her husband. And as irrational as it sounds, for her to believe that there were women trapped in the wallpaper, in the end of the story, she ripped the wallpaper from her room, believing that she had freed not only herself but the other women that were trapped. And she literally stepped over her husband who had passed out on the floor. So even though the narrator was nourished and sheltered, she needed that extra something to get her through that sickness. And as delirious as it was, the story that she concocted in her head and that she wrote down in her diary did just that. It got her through it. It helped her overcome that fear. Now, when it comes to telling the truth, sometimes talking about things can be a little hard when you're just bluntly stating it. So, using hypotheticals or similes can be much easier. In the story called Hills Like White Elephants, there's a couple and they're sitting outside and they're talking, and the woman says that the surrounding hills look like white elephants. Now, we all know that the white elephant she's talking about is her unborn child. And they're going back and forth, and you realize that they're trying to decide whether or not they should keep the child, whether or not they should have an abortion. The boyfriend obviously wants to have an abortion, and as the story goes on, you can see that the woman doesn't want to have an abortion. She eventually says that the hills are lovely, and they don't really look like white elephants. And to me, that's her saying that it probably wouldn't be so bad to keep the child. She wants to keep the child, she wants to get married, she wants to settle down. And for her, it was hard to just come out and say that. So she used the story, the simile, of the hills around her looking like white elephants. Now, in the incidents in The Life of a Slave Girl by Jacobs, in the very beginning of the story, Jacob writes an introduction in which she explains her reasoning for writing the autobiography. She uses a pseudonym, Linda Brent, instead of her real name. And to me, her whole story, her whole autobiography was her memories come to life. And she even said in the introduction that her life was painful and she would rather have kept it private. But she thought that the world needed to know what slavery was actually like in order for the anti-slavery movement to gain some momentum. And if she hadn't told her story, we wouldn't know who she is, we wouldn't know what she went through, and honestly, would we even care? But we read her story, we know the pain that she went through, and personally, I wouldn't want anyone to go through that pain again. So, by her telling her story, everyone remembers it, even to this day. And you can use her memory to educate others on the dangers of slavery and prevent a repetition of the past. And that's how her story kept her memory alive. So hopefully with all the examples that I gave you, you can see how stories are so important. Once again, if we look at Pullman's quote, which says, after nourishment, shelter, and companionship, stories are the things that we need most in this world. You can see why stories aren't really what we need most in this world, after all those other things. They help us overcome our fears, like the narrator did in The Yellow Wallpaper. They can help us tell the truth, no matter how painful, like the woman from Hills Like White Elephants, or they can help keep a memory alive, like Jacob's from Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl. So how will you use stories?